This is the place where you spent some of the best days of your life. The place where you hurried down the tower steps. It's where you found your calling. Where you discovered the real you. We can't take you back to your first home game or reintroduce you to your soulmate. We can't take you back in time, but we can get you pretty close. For more than 130 years, the Texas Exes has kept Longhorns tied to this place and protected our alma mater for future generations. You belong here. Stay connected to the people and the place that changed your life forever. Because the next best thing to being here is membership in the Texas Exes.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's first ever virtual lunchtime lecture. I'm Chuck Harris, Executive Director of the Texas Exes, and again, welcome. We were so excited to see the overwhelming response to today's lecture. So clearly our topic, coping with COVID-19 and making life online work, is resonating with a lot of you. Our speaker today is Dr. Keri Stephens, a distinguished teaching professor in the Department of Communication Studies at UT's Moody School of Communications. Dr. Stephens is a native Texan, a life member of the Texas Exes, and a professor at UT since 2007. The COVID-19 pandemic has forced many people around the globe to adapt to new ways of working and going to school. In today's talk, Dr. Stephens will share research and practical tips for living our lives online. Disasters like COVID-19 are filled with uncertainty, and combining these feelings with the increased use of technology can be, frankly, exhausting. We hope you will walk away from this lecture with new ideas on how to communicate online with colleagues, employees, students, managers, friends in a positive and restorative way. As a flood survivor, she has long been interested in the subject of disasters and did a TED Talk on her research about how people use social media to get rescued during Hurricane Harvey. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Keri Stephens. Professor, take it away.
Hi, y'all. Welcome. This is Keri Stephens, and I'm so excited to see you all today. You know, I would like for us to take a minute and think about all the different changes that we have been through recently. You know, COVID-19 is a very different type of disaster. And I would say that one of the most common things that we're seeing is that we're living our lives and we're working online. So the reality of what we're facing today is that it's a brand new and totally different world. And one of the things that my teams are doing is we're actually studying these different types of situations that we're going through. So if y'all want to go ahead and advance my slides now, we can go ahead and get started. Thanks so much. So let me ask you all, why do we feel so exhausted? Do you know? I don't know about you, but I think that a lot of the reason that we feel exhausted is that we're just flat overloaded and we are overwhelmed with all of this information. So there's several key reasons why that's happening. The first thing is that we actually are having to deal with changing uncertainty, constantly changing conditions, and we're worried about health. And so if you're that type of person who is realizing that you're feeling stress, you're not alone. And I really hope that today, whenever I share with you these 5 tips to support remote work, that we are going to feel a little bit better about that exact situation. So let's dive in with tip number 1. And I'll give them a minute to catch up. Yeah, there we go. I want you all to be bold like a Longhorn. And I tell you that, and you're probably not going to be surprised, coming from a communication professor, that I want you to talk about the emerging norms that you are seeing going on around you. So let me give you a few examples of what those emerging norms might be. So in the workplace in particular, we're talking about changes in work hours, Are you expected to work the same old normal hours? Have you had those conversations? Or is everybody just kind of going along going, I think this is what we do. What about taking time off? Is that still acceptable? Or should you put an out of office message on? You know, what are these norms that are emerging? And now let's just talk practical. You know, how are we going to support our colleagues? And what do we wear? I'll tell you a quick story because I have a college junior and a high school senior that live in my house. And one of the things that I asked them is I said, what do you expect your teachers and professors to wear when they're on these types of calls? And my daughter said, you know, I actually feel weird if they come in a t-shirt and they look too casual. I expect their role is that they're a professional. And so I invite you to have those conversations, because if she and I hadn't talked about it, I don't know that I really would have thought about it being such a serious thing for these students. That also leads me to life online. I want you to have some conversations with peers about, is it okay to actually turn your video off if you've been on all day? Can you honestly share your frustrations with these groups of people? And will they be supportive? Or is this kind of a rah-rah, we're going to get online and we're just going to celebrate for a while type of a group? And then another thing to think about is how frequently you should connect with people. What I'd like for you to do now, because I'm not one to just kind of talk at people a lot, is I want you to type into the Q&A. What kinds of things have you noticed that your work groups have not necessarily talked about, or maybe your friends and family haven't talked about it, in terms of these emerging norms that you might see that, that could be happening? So let's give it a minute and these will be published, and then I can kind of make a few comments. My hope is that you will give this a little bit of thought, because when you go back, one of the very first things that you can do is you can start to have these conversations. And they're not always really comfortable conversations, but I think they are important. So let me go ahead and look at a few of these, and I will make some comments on what I'm seeing. I'm not sure y'all are seeing any yet, but hopefully you'll get to see some of these soon. So yeah, you know, people are talking about things like, you know, they hadn't thought about whether or not they're expected to look like they're in an office. And let me just kind of tell you, one of the things that I did is I don't have a dedicated home office at home. I'm working out of my formal dining room. And so what I did to try to make myself feel a little more professional is I crafted my own workspace, and I'm actually in a great big formal dining room. Behind this bookshelf is actually my piano. So, you know, a lot of those kind of things are things that we're seeing. Other comments that people have are, let me take a look right fast. Yeah, you know what? I think this is really an important comment, that a lot of people are having trouble juggling work and life. And I tell you, I'm pretty fortunate in a lot of ways. I don't have small children. My colleagues who have small children, I really encourage you all to reach out to them, because they are truly juggling life in the middle of work. And I'll also tell you that the college students are also, and I hope we have several of them online today too, they're also juggling a lot. When they were thrown back home, several of them actually didn't have a dedicated room anymore because their parents had given it to a sibling. And so, you know, I had one student who actually was logging in. The only quiet place he could find in the house was in his closet. And so I think we need to be empathetic about the fact that things are really, really different, and we need to talk. All right, I'm going to move on. If we have some additional questions, we're going to hold some of those for the end, because I'll leave time for us to talk about them. So my second tip is, y'all, we've got to take breaks. We can't always be on, and we can't expect our colleagues to be available 24/7. You know, I'm doing a lot of things right now to try to separate that, to keep myself energized, because otherwise we get exhausted. As a matter of fact, happy hours sometimes aren't really happy hours anymore. because it's just one more meeting that you have to attend at the end of the day. But then some of them are kind of fun. The other thing I would encourage you to think about is, can you put an out of office message on? Even if you want to go sit in your backyard for several hours, maybe put an out of office message so you can literally take a break. Because the bottom line is, work and school in the middle of life, it's just not very easy. You know, one of the things that we find is that people are overloaded a lot more, and we're talking about the fact that we're overloaded so much more. Couple of quick tips here. First, I would highly recommend you not send long emails, and if you ever have to, warn people at the beginning and consider using some bullets. Make these easy. I know that for me right now, what I've done is certain people send really long messages or their institutional messages. I have dedicated filters set up on my email because I don't want to look at those in my mornings. I want to save them for the afternoon, and then I can get the rest of my day done without having to drag through a long email message. Think about using links to have people go to things that are interesting in your emails. It's another kind of way to make this work. And then finally, you know, a lot of programs, Outlook and Google, you have the option for saving when your messages get sent to people. And so that you don't have to send them on weekends and on evenings, you can actually have them arrive during a normal work day. You know, I have a confession to make, and that is that my favorite time of day to work right now is really early in the morning. And I'm not a morning person, but what I'm doing is I'm finding that if I get up and I get at least an hour in before anybody's up in my house and before my email starts bombarding me, I just have a much better day. So that's just a tip that I'll share with you. You know, I also have done a lot of research with college students. So if you think this is something that younger people aren't dealing with, I promise you they are. As a matter of fact, this quote that I have on this slide actually came from a student who participated in one of my focus groups where we talked about whether or not people felt overloaded. And especially now that we carry our mobile phones with us everywhere, it's almost like we can't escape. Now, multitasking is also going to be something I'm going to ask you to limit. I know it's really tempting. As a matter of fact, whenever you're not engaged and you're just listening to something and it goes on forever, whether it's a class, I heard one professor had at my daughter's school had given a 2-hour lecture. Oh my gosh, I promise nobody was listening to that for 2 hours. And how many of you have tried to go to meetings that are like 5 hours long? Ugh, yuck. I promise you people are going to be multitasking, and they're also going to be doing something that we study and research, which is called multi-communicating. And let me explain this for a minute, because I think it's really important. That's when you're carrying on multiple conversations with people through a bunch of different technologies. It's actually a lot more cognitively taxing, and if you do it a lot, you're likely to make mistakes. If you're finding yourself a little stressed, go ahead and consider limiting that. See if it helps you. By the way, some people are pretty good at it. And so you might be one of those people too. So these are not absolutes, but I'm trying to give you some ideas for things to play around where you won't feel quite as overloaded. Multitask, the next thing I want to talk about is tip number 4, which is how you can provide some resources to help others, and also, you know, how you might help your friends and family as well. So in the workplace, one of the most incredible strategies that I've heard so far is a lot of companies, and Google in particular, it was in the news, they gave all their employees, I think it was $1,000, and they said, equip your home offices. And I thought that was really clever, and companies that can afford to do that, it's a great strategy. The reason is some people need a sit-to-stand desk. Some people need a video camera. Some people have an old laptop. And the other thing to really think about is that some people don't have good internet connection, and they are now using their personal cell phones so much more than they have historically, that offering to pay some of those bills can be incredibly helpful for people. People aren't going to ask you, okay? And so if you have the power and the resources to make those things happen, offer them. They really feel like gifts when they're offered that way. The other thing that I thought was kind of clever is one organization that was having some all-day meetings. They said if we had met in person, we would have brought in lunch. So they had the addresses of all their employees and they had lunch delivered to their homes. I thought that was a little out of the box. So now let's take a look in our lives, some ideas that we might do, because we don't necessarily have unlimited resources, right? Think of little bitty things that you can do. Y'all, thank you notes. They're probably even more important than anything yet. And what one of my groups just did is we had a librarian who has helped us set up an entire research approach. And so we all jumped on a video conferencing platform and we recorded her a multi-person video message, a minute long, and then we emailed it to her. And, you know, she emailed back and said, oh my gosh, this is fantastic. Thank you so much. And the reason we did that instead of sending something to her home is I felt a little weird asking for her personal home address, but I had her email. So this was the way we worked around that. I want you to be creative. You know, some of the things that we're finding that we're having to do since being online, it can get to be a drag after a while. And so do things like wear your favorite t-shirt day or wear a hat. You know, I have a hat that I keep by me and it's a pirate hat, okay? And so we've done all kinds of crazy things like that. And I know that in the fall, I'm actually planning to have my office hours be themed. I did this in the spring and the students seemed to really appreciate it. We had bring your pet to office hours day. We had introduced someone in your home because a lot of people had moved home and they were sharing with siblings. And so I would encourage you to be creative and think out of the box. Background competitions are also something that I've heard of groups where people are using all the different kind of fancy backgrounds. So what I'd like to do next is I'd like to ask you once again to use the Q&A and make a few comments about what are some of the resources and the different ideas that you have used to support friends and family. And I want you to share the things that are out of the box because I would love to learn some new tips as well. And you know what, while we're looking at some of those and they're coming into the Q&A, I want to address a quick question, and that is talking about this notion of interruptions with family, with dogs, with that, and what's acceptable. I actually think that's something you need to talk about in your groups, but I also would invite you to be a lot more understanding. I am not joking that I don't have a door on my office. My cat comes and visits periodically, and there's not a lot I can do about that. So be gracious, be understanding, but also talk about, you know, times whenever you need people to try to limit those activities. So it looks to me like lots of people talk about, you know, resources as being family members talking to one another. Absolutely. Before I started this talk today, I went and told everybody, y'all, I need an hour. And they're pretty respectful. I'm lucky. They're older kids. And so it's my cats that I have to worry about the most. I'll go ahead and hold some of the other questions till the end, but don't worry, we'll try to get back to as many of those as possible. And let me move on to my tip number 5. I don't know about y'all, but I was not trained to be on air all the time. And I feel like being a professor, this is just not what comes naturally. So I've had to work a lot at being more comfortable with this because first of all, there is a lot of pressure that people feel for looking good or okay on video. And it makes you very self-conscious, the fact that you can see your video up there on the screen. And so what a lot of people do is I suggest they turn it off, especially when they're speaking, because it can become distracting to yourself and make you feel even more self-conscious, which is not what we want to do. The other thing that's a real challenge is if we're working out of our bedrooms, we're working on our beds, a lot of people are, you know, we're seeing beds in our background. And I think we need to talk about the fact that that's going to be the way it's going to be for a lot of people. And so be gracious, but also have those conversations. And remember that life is happening all around us, and we can't control the fact that that happens. I'm actually very hopeful that moving forward, we're going to become a lot more understanding of the fact that working in your life and trying to balance all of this, it's just not as easy as people have pretended that it is for many years. So I'm encouraged, and the research is already starting to show that we may have some shifts in attitude concerning this. I did want to mention sometimes the best thing with cameras, turn them off, take a break. If you're finding yourself getting exhausted being in too many meetings back to back, it could be that you are feeling that pressure to perform, and performative energy is at a totally different level than if we were casually having a conversation. I want to share a few tips on working with video, since so many of us are having to do that now. And just to let you know, I actually started working with web conferencing, is what we used to talk about then. I worked in industry for a decade before I became an academic. And back in the 90s, when the very first company in San Francisco launched web conferencing, it was called Placeware. I was actually there, and we were using those platforms. So I have been using it, and I started studying it and publishing in 2004. So this is not a new reality. What's new is that so many people who have never had to do this before are now finding their lives are behind a camera. So a few tips. First of all, know where your video camera location is. And by the way, what we will do is we'll share in the live event, and I think they'll be sending you an email after the event. I have a few recorded videos that I've made to help people with dealing with setting up their offices, and also how to work with the camera in a lot more detail. And they'll actually give you some of those links, and you can feel free to copy and paste those and check them out later if you find them helpful. All right, so back to video cameras. Y'all have all seen those situations where you're like looking at people's noses. Let me tell you why. Their cameras are at the bottom of their laptops. I'm lucky, mine's at the top, and I even have an external camera. So there are some ways that you can work with your camera. And in these videos, I show you some really low-cost tips, like stacking up extra office supplies to get your camera at eye level. Super simple stuff that we can do. Realize and think about your backgrounds. Lighting, this is probably one of the biggest challenges, y'all. Lots of people are putting the windows behind them, and that's definitely not what we want to do. What's ideal is if you can face a window. That'll give you some nice light on your face whenever you're talking. The other thing, and this is something I have to watch constantly, is if I move constantly like this, I promise you, people who are on slower bandwidth connections are going to see me looking robotic. And so you actually want to limit your movement, which once again is something really different from what we do in person. If you're hearing an echo, you may need to either wear a headset or get some type of an external mic. And then, like I said, I'll share some of those YouTube videos that I created for you there. I do also want to share with you some tips about if you find yourself returning either to a classroom or to a place of work. A few cautions that I want to have you be aware of. First of all, one of the things I think that we in the US have always prided ourselves on is keeping health information very private. And what we're finding ourselves doing now is there's these trade-offs between people's privacy, people's pre-existing conditions, and the decisions that they're having to make about either being comfortable returning to work or not. And by the way, I've had multiple students who have emailed me saying, if you're going to have your class in person, I'm not going to be there. I've had COVID-19, it was very serious, and I never want to get it again. And so I won't be doing anything in person for the next 6 months. And so I think these are really important conversations to have. We also need to be sensitive. I just had a publication come out where I collaborated with a group of 8 people from multiple countries, and we actually talked about some of the concerns that we have about stigma and about prejudices that come out when their mouths are covered and their noses are covered. And so be aware that if people are interacting with masks, they're going to look different. And this is something, once again, I think we need to have conversations about and make sure that we're treating everyone as well as we possibly can. We're all in this together, right? So my last two tips I want to share are kind of the key takeaways. And the first thing that I want you to remember is we can do this, y'all. We can make it through this. It's never going to probably go back to the normal that we knew before, but we're going to craft a new normal. And in particular, be flexible and be supportive. We do not know what kinds of situations our colleagues, our peers, and our students are in. So we have to be understanding. There's also a lot of research out there on a concept called social support. And that means we actually need other people to support us. And it's been linked to positive health outcomes. Take care of yourselves. And if you have both physical or mental matters that happen, please reach out and get help. I think that a lot of times we forget that our mental health is just as important to us as our physical health. And this is hard on a lot of people. So I hope that we can, have great conversations and prove ourselves that we can make this work. So what I'd like to do is I'd like for you to type into the Q&A one last time. And I want you to type one thing that you commit to doing to making your life online work, both for you and for other people. Because this is probably going to be our reality for a while. Ooh, I love this. Someone said host a virtual scavenger hunt. I think that sounds like a lot of fun. I'd love to learn more. Oh, an Amazon Prime watch party. Great ideas, y'all. People have started coffee chats. Oh, that's fantastic. And this is a CEO that's saying that they're realizing that that's a lot more important. My work group recently decided we're not a meeting group. We don't meet a lot, but we actually decided that we would start having regularly scheduled meetings because we need people to talk about and or to talk to about the different things that we're going through. So I love the fact that people are sharing all these great ideas. And I also want to encourage you to, make a commitment to yourself right now to do two things this week for someone else. They can be incredibly low cost. They can be as easy as sending them an email, but I want you to be creative and think out of the box. So thank you all so much. I really hope that you've found this content helpful. That's really my goal. I do research in this area. I have research teams right now that are working on things like specifically COVID-19. We're looking at employer emails and the impact that they have, whether or not we should communicate using lots of factual information or possibly communicate using stories. And we actually have a big data set that we're trying to get analyzed right now. I'm also doing some work on with emergency response teams, and they are interacting with machines and some artificial intelligence to try to identify when people post on social media risky behaviors around COVID-19 or prevention behaviors. So those are just a few examples. I'm about to start a project on floods in Texas. Super excited to get that started. And I'm always doing some work around risk and health. So let me at this point open it up for questions, because I would love to address those questions. Actually, I forgot. We have a bonus of something that's going to get to happen today. I think I've stressed a lot about reaching out and doing nice, unexpected things for people. Well, the Texas Exes is willing to do that for our group. What they're going to be doing is they're going to choose 5 people randomly and send you a little gift. And so if you get an email asking for your address of where to send your gift, thank the Texas Exes, because I think we all are in this together, and we want to show that we're doing some good things for one another. All right, so at this point, let me go ahead and open it up for questions. I'm seeing some great ideas fly through here, y'all. Scheduled breaks to walk outside, absolutely. People are swimming, people are exercising, people are having lunch with their kids. This is really meaningful stuff. Well, thank you all so much, and I know that at this time, Patricia is going to jump in and kind of moderate our Q&A session. And I'm going to be online answering questions for the next about 25 minutes. So I deliberately left a lot of time for us to chat and have informal conversations. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. If you'll just type in your questions in the QA, we'll publish those, and Dr. Keri Stephens can take a look at those.
I'm loving these ideas. You know what? You all are right. This is a great way to meet people around the world. Snail mail, awesome. I can't believe how much more meaningful it is. I don't know about y'all. There was this meme going around for a while about the dogs running to meet the postal carriers every day. At my house, it's my family. Everybody runs to see what packages have come for the day. So it's just a different way of living, right?
It is. And early on, we had just a comment, but it really does open up for questions. And one of our viewers had said, you know, we're not really talking about how we're really feeling right now, and tips for dealing with feelings and tips for talking about that in a positive way.
Yes, there is a lot of research that says that we actually do need to be talking about our feelings. But I will tell you, you've got to find the right group of people to talk about feelings. I'm really fortunate. My immediate work group area, we are actually hosting sessions where we can openly talk about our concerns and our work that we're doing on preparing our classes and helping one another and getting advice. And, you know, I confess to our work group that I got an email a couple of weeks ago and it upset me so much I cried all afternoon. And so I think finding those groups of people where you can talk openly is really important. I've also tried to set that up with my graduate students. We actually are meeting on a regular basis all through the summer, not only doing research, but we're setting aside time to share what's going on in our lives and to share if we need help. Because inviting people to ask for help, it's hard for a lot of people, but super, super important.
Great question. We have another one that's a little bit on the technical side of things. What's the ideal meeting time length? I mean, 1 hour, 30 minutes, or do you attempt to ever have any meetings that are longer than that?
Yeah, if you have longer meetings, you need to have breaks. And it's not just kind of breaks, and it's not the kind of breaks where everybody take a break, but we'll just keep talking, because people will not take a break if they think they're going to miss something. And so there's a lot of research out there on meetings. There's actually much less on the amount of time we should be spending in online meetings. However, one thing that we do know, and where I've kind of borrowed from the literature on online pedagogy and on teaching courses online, which I've done for quite a number of years, is that people's attention spans are a lot shorter. And so usually the rule of thumb is you don't want people to have to sit and do nothing for more than about 5 to 7 minutes before you invite them to do something. And so with meetings, the meeting research usually says shorter the better, but you also have to get your work done. So I would say if you can keep your meetings under 30 minutes, that's great. But if you have to go to an hour, be sure that you deliberately take breaks. And these all-day conferences, I don't know how many people are attending those, but they're hard. They are really, really hard. And realize that the longer you go, the more people are going to look for that mobile phone, and they're going to be sitting there doing this, and they're not going to be paying attention. So it's a trade-off. That's a great question, though, and really important to think through.
Thank you. We've got a couple more. Any ideas for how to hold a brainstorming session virtually?
Oh my gosh, I was just in a session last week and people were showing some software programs that you can use. I haven't played with the one that they just sent me, but there are going to be some tools coming out that people are using that work great. I'll tell you the way that I'm doing it through Zoom is I actually use breakout rooms a whole lot, and the platform that UT is using a lot is Zoom, and I'm able to divide people into smaller groups. And then what I ask them to do is brainstorm or come up with their ideas, and I give them a set amount of time. And then when they come back together, we're sharing the information and doing report outs, just like what you would do in person. So there are definitely some ways to do this. And I think that we're going to see some technology solutions that are coming out that will be well worth looking into.
Perfect. Also, someone was asking about performance evaluations. They're coming up, and are there any suggestions on how to do them virtually?
Oh, I tell you, we've had a lot of conversations about this at UT. People feel a lot of stress right now. And the problem is that in the United States in particular, and by the way, this is very different in a lot of places in Europe and also in Canada, but in the United States, we have this ideal worker kind of narrative that floats around where people think that means you're serious and you don't show that your life is happening around you. And now all of a sudden, this has been turned upside down. So I would first of all invite people to have conversations around what is expected and then do their performance evaluations based on what those conversations were. And they should be a lot more permissive and a lot more forgiving because everybody's working in such different conditions. I think it would be horribly unfair to hold people to the same standards when they're not working from home and give a performance evaluation. So I would encourage people to kind of scramble and quickly reset some guidelines, and then you have something realistic that you can evaluate people on.
That's great. It's very helpful. And we can use that at Texas Exes too. And kind of a related question, or do you have any tips on kind of tough discussions that employers may need to have with their employees about quality of work or quantity of work when we are all working virtually?
Yes, that's also something that's a real challenge. One thing that I would encourage you to consider is that if you need to have conversations, think about whether or not they should happen over the telephone and not through video. There are a lot of times that I think we should be having conversations that don't involve showing where we are, and especially when they're tough conversations. I don't think people should shy away from the quality discussions and work-related issues, but I think what they need to do instead is they need to help people brainstorm what would work for you in your life. And it's like I said, I get up before the rest of my family does because that gives me uninterrupted time. And people are going to have to think creatively about how to get their work done, but also not neglect the fact that their life is going on around them. So have the conversations, but be willing to help people think around how it can work for them.
Thank you. There's not necessarily a question, but there's several comments around the idea of, it's becoming a little bit more acceptable to have interruptions and things going on around you, behind you, because you're working virtually.
Yeah.
But is there a time when enough is enough? Do we know when we're crossing those lines?
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I don't think we know when we're crossing these lines. And that's why I started this talk with the idea of be bold like a longhorn and talk, because these are not easy conversations. You absolutely have to have conversations about, you have to still get your work done a lot of times. And I promise you, I will have to have conversations in the fall with my classes. We will actually go online with the first class and we will have a conversation about norms, what is expected. And, you know, I'm going to have to talk about appropriate dress online, and we're going to have to talk about interruptions and mute and all of these kind of things. I think that a lot of people are now realizing that they've let some of these behaviors get a little extreme. And so I would say make it a commitment to talk now. It's only going to get harder because a lot of people don't realize it's bothering others. And that's kind of the rule that I'm using is, and that's what I'll tell my students, is that I don't care what you show up in, but it might be distracting to your peers. And so that's the issue there is, does it bother other people? Well, then we need to talk about it. We need to have a conversation.
We have a couple of folks that are either about to attend a day-long conference of some sort virtually or are hosting them. And so, you know, one question was, you know, I have this all-day conference. How do I get through that? And then a related question is, you know, it's from a conference planner. And if, you know, if they schedule breaks, the concern is that they will lose participants. So are there ways to engage and keep them engaged regularly during the meeting without necessarily a scheduled break? And then, you know, where his concern is trying to make sure that everyone stays at the conference the entire time.
So those are great concerns. And I will first of all tell you, I promise you, everyone will not stay at your all-day conference. I promise. So try to set your expectations realistically. I have already attended 3. I attend one that's a different format this next week. I watched my college-age daughter attend a leadership workshop. I know what people are doing while they turn their video cameras off, which, by the way, if they leave them on all the time, that's way exhausting. So I think it's fine for people to turn their video cameras off. So I think the better question to ask is, what are your goals and objectives, and how do you accomplish those goals and objectives, knowing full well that you're going to have what's called partial attention? And we've known about this in the research literature for years. Partial attention is reality. The trick that I use with my students is I literally am scheduling something that we do at least every 5 minutes in an online class. And sometimes it's as simple as, will everybody click the yes, no button and answer this question? I set up polls ahead of time and I have people respond to polls. I actually have a whole separate lesson plan, which is, how do I make sure that in 50 minutes I have an activity where they're physically doing something every 5 minutes? It's hard work. It is much harder work than it ever would be in person. And I empathize for people who are planning these conferences because you have a harder job. I'm attending one this next week that's put on by industry, and I'm excited about it because what academic conferences have done is we've kind of just moved our in-person format to an online format, which is exhausting. This industry conference is going to do a 3-hour block for each of 3 days. And then the afternoon activities are jump in and do whichever ones are of interest to you. I actually think it's a clever way to approach this. But I'll know next week after I attend it if it's any better than these all-day marathons. I hope that's helpful, but I also hope that you all will be realistic and realize people are not going to give you their undivided attention. I don't care how engaging you are.
So we have a couple of other questions coming in that kind of relates to some of the items you just spoke to in a tangential way, but one of our viewers are saying that, you know, we're hearing a lot from our school district that students, whether they're online or in person instruction, will be subject to the same evaluation standards. And so, you know, what is the most effective way to drive the message to our top education officials about flexibility and empathy. And I know that you can't answer that question directly, but do you have some tips? Do you have some suggestions?
So I do, and I also really hope that what people are doing is they are saying one thing because of accreditation standards, and then being more flexible and being more understanding in reality, because it will be different. I think that the real struggle that we're all facing is that hearing those messages puts added pressure on us. And that pressure it can be too much for people. And so I think that we need to send a dual message, and the dual message is we're going to do a great job. Okay, and don't compare it to how it was before. That's not fair. We're going to do a great job, just period. And we're going to support each other through this process. And I think it has to be this double-pronged approach. The ways, the email study that I'm digging through the data right now, it actually says that people want facts and details from their employers, but they also want stories helping them imagine what the future will be in a positive way. And so that's where I'm coming with that piece of advice of coming with that dual approach. I think it's really important that we not burn our people out, because we're already seeing incredible levels of burnout. I will confess, I hit a wall at least 3 different times in the last month where I had to take a day off because I was just burned out to the point where I couldn't, every time I'd walk in to look at my computer, I would just kind of go, oh, I can't do it, I can't do it. And so this is reality, y'all. Everyone is feeling it. And so we've got to be more understanding and empathetic.
We're so happy to hear you say that, because we're all working virtually. Yeah. A lot more than we used to. So that's really wise words. Another question that's come up, which is just a different direction, is do you have suggestions or tips for those that are starting a new job during the pandemic and are working remotely?
Yes. First of all, I applaud you for thinking about that, because it is incredibly important. One of the things that we used to always tell people is that face time when you're new matters. There's a great book out there, and I probably have it on my bookshelf behind me if I looked through it. It's called The First 90 Days. And I actually think that the advice that's given in that book is still appropriate for starting a job virtually. And it's really trying to find out as much as you can about other people and about helping them be successful as it is helping yourself be successful. And so I would say that I teach the internship class in my department. And so my students start new jobs every semester. I teach the internship. And probably the number one thing that I hear back from employers is that they wish that their employees had been more proactive. And my students are telling me that's super hard online. And so my suggestion to them is consider setting a regularly scheduled time to talk with your manager. I don't care how busy they are. And you need to actually check in more frequently now that we're virtual, because you can get off on a tangent really, really quickly. So it is going to mean more communication when you're new than it ever would have been in person. But good luck. I think that there are some great ways that we can still pull this off. Just keep in mind that you're probably going to have to proactively ask a lot more questions. Okay, I think we're going to just limit the next to 2 questions, and then we'll probably run out of time. No problem. One is, it seems like the expectation is keeping your video on, and you talked a little bit about this, but he says, in my work environment, most everyone has their video off. Is there a stigma or a negative perception about those that have their video off? So that's a great question. I think that this has everything to do with the norms of the group. there are some groups where no one turns their camera on, and sometimes they talked about it, and sometimes it just happened. And you know what? If everybody's happy with it, that's fine. But I'll tell you, I'm a part of one of those groups, and I was the new person who joined. And for me, nobody ever told me the norms. And I'm like, do I leave my camera on? If I turn it off, it's very, very uncomfortable. So I finally got the nerve to email and ask, what is the norm? And they said, oh, all of us are doing other things while we're talking. So, turn it off. If you want to go for a walk while you're in this meeting, that's perfectly fine with our group. So I think the more challenging thing is that when most people have their videos on and only a couple of people have it off, there's all kinds of weird suspicion that goes on. And so talk about the norms. And one of the things that I actually learned from a study that I did with nurses is nurses will tell patients if they pull out their personal mobile phone, and maybe it's the app that they're using to enter patient information, which does happen, they will tell the patient, they'll say, I'm going to pull up my phone right now, and I'm going to be using this app to enter your information. I actually think that would be a great strategy to use with video, is to come on and say, hey, everybody, I'm going to turn my video on. I've been on 8 calls in a row today. I just need a little bit of break. Why not tell people? Be transparent. Tell them why you're turning your video off, and then there won't be suspicion. So I hope that helps.
I think it does. That's great. We have a few people who have asked this question. Have you written articles or a book covering these points so that they can share with folks who maybe want to hear from an authority, and that obviously that we need flexibility and empathy? So.
Yeah, the good news is that there are some things coming out that are talking about the importance of empathy and flexibility. I do have one article that I can send to the Texas Exes, and they can include a link to it. It's a publicly available article, and it's really where this group of 8 colleagues and I reflect on what we've gone through. We call it sense making in the literature, and then we also suggest the trends for the future. And we mentioned some of these exact things in there. There's also some books that are coming out on, I was just on Oxford University Press's site, and they have a book about the importance of feelings that's coming out. And so I think that a lot of people are starting to talk about these things. The main thing you're going to find are going to be blogs, because academic publishing takes forever. So the fact that we actually have something coming out fast is quite honestly a miracle. But we kind of pre-negotiated that before we agreed to write this piece. So I'll share that, and then keep your eyes open for some blog posts as well.
Perfect. I think that's it for our Q&A today.
Well, bye, y'all. Thank you so much. I really appreciate getting this time to spend with you. I hope that you walked away with ideas and you feel normal if you feel exhausted every once in a while and you feel overloaded, but then you also have some ideas for how to pick yourself up and how to pick up your friends and family and colleagues around you.
Wow, what an amazing lecture. I know our audience is at home or at the office, but let's please give Dr. Stephens a big virtual round of applause. Thank you so much for Dr. Stephens for taking the time to join us today. And on behalf of everyone here at Texas Exes, we want to thank you, our wonderful audience, for participating in our first ever virtual event. We hope you've learned some great tips to help you communicate online, both during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. Keep a lookout for an email later this week with a copy of Dr. Stephens' presentation and the video links she discussed today. We would also like to give a great big Texas thank you to those that donated to Texas Exes when you registered for this event. Your support allows us to continue engaging alumni and students across the globe. And just an FYI, we are definitely planning more lunchtime lectures for later this year, and you can stay up to date on future events by visiting texasexes.org/lunchtime lectures. I hope everyone enjoyed our time with Dr. Stephens, and we hope that everyone has a wonderful afternoon. We look forward to getting together with you again soon. So thank you very, very much, and y'all have a good day. Bye now.